How are you doing, everyone? And I thought, why not do a showdown between two of Masayuki Uchiyama's former pupils hailing from Studio Last House, Tai'ichirō Ohara and Naotoshi Shida. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard about Naotoshi Shida thanks to his wild sequences back on Dragon Ball Super and on many shows for that matter. However, Ohara seems to be a little overshadowed. Is this video just an excuse to spread Ohara awareness? Probably, but continuing on, he is a name that is hardly brought up at all, despite having done such a massive amount of work in this franchise. Back in the original series, he did key animation in 42 episodes, 72 in Dragon Ball Z, and likewise he also worked on GT and Super, so he's certainly been with this series for some time. But outside of that, he was one of the strongest regular key animators back in Dragon Ball Z, and the saving grace of Studio Last House episodes after Shida's departure in episode 141. And I mean quite literally, if Ohara wasn't there, Uchiyama probably would have had to solo his episodes at that point, which I think would have been spectacular. I mean, who wouldn't want an entire episode of that? I mean, take my money, no, take my family and kids in exchange. Now, of course, though, Shida likewise was also very skillful with his action scenes. He also had some similar traits to Ohara, so I thought this would be a fun comparison, and especially considering, again, they work side by side in the same studio. Of course, before we get to that and more, the featured artist for this video is Raikatsu. He does some great illustrations. I really like the colors in his work and his style in general, so go give Raikatsu a follow. I know he would very much appreciate it. Link to his account is in the description, and tag me on Insta and chuck this hashtag in the caption of your post. But with that, let's get back to the video. So the main features I'll be looking at side by side is their action scenes, artwork / art style, and effects work, since that is what they are most well known for. And I'll be comparing their work from the original Dragon Ball series and Dragon Ball Z, as Ohara's work is really hard to spot in Super, and you can see more of his unfiltered style more so in this era. Now, beginning with Ohara, one element that I really like is the anticipation behind a lot of his characters' attacks. One great example is his scene in movie 6 as Piccolo tears through Coola's guards. It's great how exaggerated the drawback is. It definitely gives an extra level of energy behind his attacks. And speaking of exaggeration with punches, he could really push how far the fist buries into an opponent. It's a great way of selling the raw power behind the blows once again. He additionally could deliver some excellent choreography. I think one fight that really defines his skill in this area is the one between Android 17 and Piccolo. There's a great variety of attacks and moves, and it keeps you constantly guessing as to what's going to happen next. Ohara also could feature some great background animation in his scenes, which was always cool to see, and combined with his camera work, it definitely increased the interest of what could be a rather simple scene on paper, such as a short scene of Goku running and bouncing across rocks. Another scene that really displays his camera work in action is in episode 137 from Dragon Ball, where he spins the camera around Krillin and Piccolo. I definitely have to commend Ueda's storyboard for the idea of the camera going under the ring, but Ohara's execution is outstanding, tackling a stack of really difficult angles, and it definitely shows that he has a solid understanding of how characters appear in 3D space. Of course, I can't forget his amazing impact frames either. I particularly love the one where he silhouettes the characters with these really sharp triangular-like shapes. He definitely draws some of the coolest impact frames I think in Dragon Ball Z. And I always liked how the hair for his characters was never really static and usually had a flowy look. Having follow through like this always adds an extra feeling of realism to the animation. But overall, there's much more complexity in his scenes than a lot of other regular key animators on Z and the original series. And also the fact that after Shida left, resulting in him having to animate a lot more in episodes, he was still able to maintain consistently a good level of quality in his scenes, which I think speaks a lot to how skillful Ohara was. Now though to Naotoshi Shida. So much like Ohara, Shida knows how to animate a solid blow. You can definitely feel the impact behind big hits. Even still, I believe Ohara managed to push it even further to the point where you could physically feel how painful some punches were, although I wouldn't say it's by a wide margin. However, Shida's choreography is simply hard to top. One fan favorite scene between Goku and Krillin that I've also broken down in depth before gives a really spectacular display of Shida going all out. The amount of moves and poses is amazing. It's quite complex, but Shida executes it in such an effortless way, and I find his fights to be quite consistently great in this area. When it comes to camera work, Shida is equally just as good. You can see it in a lot of his scenes. It's interesting and dynamic. Background animation very much the same. Shida can tackle his fair share of complex scenes, although on average I feel like you see it a little less compared to Ohara, and honestly Ohara's cut in episode 101 of the original Dragon Ball series is pretty hard to beat. However, something that many people know Shida for, and is a good trait to spot his work, is his timing. It's very smooth and I love it so much. It allows the audience to breathe and take in what's happened while also delivering the build-up behind big hits. All in all, just about every action he animates has this big amount of emphasis behind it, and just this dramatic flair that I never get tired of watching. And while Ohara definitely had good timing and generally nice flow to his scenes, I'm quite confident in saying Shida was even better in this area. Likewise, both had a good level of animated movement in their scenes. I feel like Ohara's featured a little more movement generally, however, I would still say on average Shida's actual movement to characters was usually just that bit smoother than Ohara's. And now to their art style and the general quality of their artwork. So with Ohara, I feel like this is one of the reasons his work isn't as well known, because like I mentioned in my last video, I feel like there is a good portion of fans that rate many animators based off their character art rather than their actual animation, and I totally get why. It's the sole reason Masaki Sato is one of my favorites, even despite his animation being pretty average. But in saying that, Ohara's style is a mix for me. In the original Dragon Ball series, I certainly don't mind it. When it comes to his approach with the more angular designs in Dragon Ball Z, I find some of it's appealing, maybe 30%, the rest is usually just whatever for me. I don't love it, I don't hate it, there's just nothing about it that really grabs me, although I still prefer it over Uchiyama's in most cases. But I will say some stylistic notes I certainly liked was how expressive his characters' faces could be, and the rough nature to his lines further helped bring that out. It's just a pity that Uchiyama usually corrected it away with something stock. Another feature about his work that I like seeing was the intense hatching he could feature in his art, as well as shading out parts of the face in black. I've always loved gritty artwork, so that's definitely a plus. On the other hand, his style of shading is a mix. His placement of it can provide some nice depth, but the actual shape design can be a little chaotic at times, and feature poor readability. You can see what I mean when going side by side with Shida. Although when it came to shiny and metallic surfaces, it looked really nice, but for skin, perhaps not as much. Interestingly enough though, even though Uchiyama would quite heavily correct his work, and well, any animator for that matter who worked under him, he would almost always leave Ohara's shading intact, which makes it not overly difficult to identify his work, and it certainly didn't feel as flat as Uchiyama's. And another positive I'll throw his way is that he was quite skilled in drawing vehicles, which was most likely why he was placed on many scenes involving them. Overall, Ohara was a good artist and had some nice character art, definitely had some wonky work here and there, but it was generally fine. But now to Naotoshi Shida. So I feel like you could see Shida's uncorrected work pop up a little more than Ohara's, which was a massive positive. His style was very much the complete opposite of Uchiyama's and Ohara's, especially in the earlier arcs of Z. He used a lot of straights, even the fingers didn't escape. However, over time it softened up somewhat, but it still had a similar touch. For example, with this correction from Tadayoshi Yamamoru, you can see the eyebrows for Shenron feature curved lines, whereas with Shida again it's just straights. But overall, it gave a very sharp look to his work, which I certainly am for, but even if you don't go for that style, his character art regardless was quite well drawn. And something that he had very much in common with Ohara was expressivity. He would pack some great expressions into characters. I always love seeing those narrow, arched up eyes he would draw, and you can spot those massive mouths quite a lot in his work. Even in the original series, he was quite competent in this area. And of course, I can't forget Shida's dynamic poses, which very few in the series I think could rival, and is something that he's continued to push even more and more over the years. But his love for it is still very present in this era. I love the energy behind them and how forceful they feel. He also had a lot of foreshortening in his art, especially with the hands, which delivers a lot of depth and is always interesting to see. Although he did have a tendency to sometimes draw quite large heads in proportion to the body, but it wasn't too much of a consistent issue. Overall with Shida, I'm quite confident in saying that his character art was generally better drawn and more appealing. But finally to their effects work. So Ohara's effects were excellent. One clip that really puts that on display is from Dragon Ball Z episode 172, when the Royal Defense Force does an offensive on Cell. All the little details like how he animates the smoke from the gun mount here and how it disperses instead of just drawing a big cloud of smoke and sort of just leaving it there, and just the general timing to the explosions. It's really nice work, and the shape design of course is great. From the smoke trails, muzzle flash, I love it all, and it's consistently good throughout his work. And one noticeable trait to identify his effects is with his smoke. He adds these little specks all over the clouds and generally just uses two tones. With Shida, he certainly doesn't hold back either. His effects work definitely had impact, and one superb example is from episode 74. The amount of broken rock breaking away with multiple explosions following thereafter is quite striking and is a grand finish to his scene. I also like how the sharp nature to his lines definitely carries over to how he draws rocks and whatnot. In terms of shape design for smoke, he gets a bit more detailed than Ohara, usually drawing three tones with quite an interesting design with a fluffy look to the clouds as well. But this time though, I'm very split as to who had the better effects. If we were talking about Shida's modern stuff, that would be a different story, but here it's kind of hard to choose. Although Ohara had more sort of subtle details to his effect, so I think I slightly lean to Ohara in this case. But final verdict and conclusion, both were among the top in regards to being some of the strongest action animators on Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. I enjoy both their work, but I think I'll give the vote to Naotoshi Shida, thanks to how well timed out his action scenes were, his really dynamic artwork, as well as just preferring his art style over Ohara. I really don't think there is that much of a gap in their skill level, although perhaps near the end of the series I would say it does start to become a bit more noticeable, but in fairness it was just Ohara and Uchiyama most of the time doing all the key animation at that point, so he had a lot more work on his plate, so I'm sure that was definitely a contributing factor. But besides that, Ohara in general is an excellent animator and is definitely underrated. I do remember AJ describing Ohara as the Higashide of Dragon Ball Z, and I think that's a very fitting description. But with that final note though, hope you enjoyed the video and perhaps learnt something new, and I'll see you later.